The night I married him should have been the happiest of my life, but I remember the crushing weight of the veil, the cloying perfume of roses, and the hollow look in his eyes as he kissed me before the crowd. In my first life, I thought it was nerves, thought it was the burden of expectation, thought it was love in disguise. But it wasn't. Behind that polished smile was the man who would ruin me. My husband, the man everyone envied me for winning, spent our wedding night with another woman. He paraded her brazenly, whispered poison into my ear, turned my family against me, and when he had drained me of everything, he left me to rot, discarded like a broken toy. I had cried, begged, hated myself for not being enough, until the day came when despair took me whole and I closed my eyes on a life wasted in humiliation. But fate played a crueler trick, or perhaps a kinder one. I awoke with my veil heavy on my head, my heart pounding, my hands trembling against the lace of my wedding gown. The air smelled of roses again, the chatter of guests filled the hall, and the man I once called husband was smiling at me as if the years of betrayal had never happened. For a moment I thought it a nightmare. But when I pinched my skin and tasted the metallic tang of blood from biting my lip too hard, I knew. I had been reborn. And this time I would not be his victim. I would be his undoing. I steadied my breathing, forcing a smile to match his, but behind my lashes I watched him like a hawk, cataloging every twitch of his lips, every glance he cast toward the crowd. I remembered the woman he would sneak away to meet, remembered the lies he told, remembered every cruel word he threw at me when I had once tried to please him. He thought me foolish then, pliant, naive. Let him think so again. But I would not weep this time. I would make him believe he was the only man I adored, let him taste devotion so sweet it burned. I would make him fall, not just into my bed, but into the kind of love he had never believed me capable of giving. And when his heart was mine, when his obsession consumed him, I would shatter it. I would drag his sins into the light, expose his cheating, his lies, his cruelty, until all who once praised him spat his name in disgust. But revenge does not bloom alone. As the feast continued and the crowd roared their approval, I felt another gaze settle on me, sharp, steady, different from all the others. He was there, just as I remembered him from my first life, the quiet shadow at the edge of the celebration. My husband's closest friend and confidant, the man who had watched in silence as I suffered, who had looked at me sometimes with pity, sometimes with something deeper, something unspoken. In my first life, I had been too broken to see it clearly. But now, in this rebirth, I recognized him for what he was, not just a bystander, but a potential ally. His eyes met mine across the hall, and for a fleeting moment, recognition flared in me so strong I nearly faltered. He knew nothing of my second chance, yet something in his gaze told me he would follow if I led. And I would lead him, as surely as I would lead my husband to his ruin. The game had begun. I would play the perfect bride, the devoted wife, the treasure my husband never cherished, and I would make him drown in the love he once scorned. All the while, with the help of the man in the shadows, I would weave the web that would end him. This time, the wedding night would not be my humiliation. It would be the first move in my revenge. The reception sparkled with champagne and shallow laughter, chandeliers casting their glow over nobles and socialites who toasted us as though this union were a fairy tale. I played my part flawlessly, clinging to my new husband's arm, gazing up at him with wide eyes as though he were the center of my world. He lapped it up, his ego fed by every flutter of my lashes, every shy smile I aimed his way. But behind the veil of innocence, my mind was sharp as a blade. I remembered how this night had truly ended in my past life, him disappearing into the shadows with his mistress, leaving me alone in our gilded cage of a suite. I remembered the shame, the bitterness of knowing I was nothing more than a decorative wife, discarded before the marriage bed had even grown cold. Not this time. This time I would make him linger, make him crave me, make him believe I was the only woman who could ever understand him. His hand slid down my waist as he leaned to whisper, "You look stunning tonight, my love." I let my lips part in a soft laugh, tilting my head so he could breathe in the perfume I'd chosen carefully, one he once told me reminded him of devotion. "For you, I'll always look stunning," I said sweetly, and I felt the way his grip tightened, the flicker of hunger in his gaze. "Good. Let him fall." Across the room, I found the other gaze again, watching from the shadows like a sentinel. He didn't join the dancing, didn't join the toasts, didn't seek attention. But his eyes never left me, dark and steady, as if silently promising that he knew every move I was making and would not let me fall alone this time. Later, when the night had grown heavy with wine and laughter, I slipped away from my husband's side to breathe, my gown trailing across the marble balcony. The cool night air kissed my skin, and I let the mask drop for just a heartbeat, my smile fading, my jaw clenching. "You're playing a dangerous game," came a low voice behind me. I turned, and there he was, the man I remembered only as a shadow in my first life. Tonight, he was more. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming the night itself, his eyes searching mine. "If you lure him in too deep, he won't let you go." I laughed softly, bitterly, my gaze cutting back to the glowing ballroom where my husband charmed his guests. "That's the point," I whispered. His silence stretched, heavy, before he finally moved closer, so near I could feel the heat of him at my back. "Then let me help you." My heart raced, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. In my first life, I had been alone in my suffering. In this one, I had an ally. A man willing to step into the shadows with me. A man who would watch me weave a web of love and lies until my husband was hopelessly entangled. And when the time came, together we would rip it apart, thread by thread, until his perfect world collapsed at my feet. The wedding suite was a golden cage, lavish and suffocating, every surface gleaming with wealth stolen from others. In my first life, I had entered that room trembling with hope, waiting for a husband who never came. He had slipped away into the night with the woman he truly wanted, leaving me alone on silk sheets that smelled of emptiness. I had lain awake until dawn, my heart shattering with every tick of the clock, my humiliation a brand that burned into my very bones. But this time I was ready. When he led me through the doors, the applause of the reception still echoing behind us, I clung to his hand with deliberate sweetness. I saw the flicker in his eyes, the way he glanced toward the clock as if already calculating his escape, and I smiled inwardly. "Not this time," I thought. "I won't let you run to her. Not before you've tasted the devotion you once mocked, not before you've fallen so deep into me that you can't see daylight." I would make him linger, make him believe I was his, until the lies he told would feel like truths in his own mouth. He poured us wine, his smile indulgent, his voice smooth as he said, "To our future, my darling." I lifted my glass, letting my gaze soften as though his words filled me with joy. I touched the rim of my glass to his and whispered, "To a future where we never part." He drank deeply, savoring the illusion I spun around him, and I pretended to blush when his eyes lingered on my lips. The predator thought himself the hunter, but in truth, he was already stepping into my snare. Hours later, when he tried to excuse himself under the pretense of attending to matters with guests, I stopped him with a soft hand on his sleeve, tilting my face toward him with practiced vulnerability. "Stay," I murmured, my voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "I don't want to spend my first night as your wife alone." The words struck him harder than any accusation, any threat. His eyes flickered, uncertainty in a man who always thought himself untouchable. He hesitated, and then, to my hidden satisfaction, he stayed. We spoke until the candles burned low, my laughter warm, my questions curious, my admiration perfectly painted. I fed his vanity carefully, weaving admiration with subtle hints of intimacy, watching his mask slip with every moment. By the time he pulled me into his arms and pressed his lips to mine, the arrogance in his touch was tempered with something I had never seen in my first life, hesitation, even awe. He thought he was conquering me, but I knew better. I was conquering him. And somewhere beyond the locked doors of the suite, I knew I was not truly alone. For as dawn painted the sky, I felt the weight of another gaze on me, one I remembered from the balcony. He was out there, in the shadows, watching, protecting, waiting. In my past life, he had been silent, bound by loyalty and fear. But in this new life, he had spoken. He had promised to help me. And that promise burned brighter than any candle in the room. My husband thought the night was his victory. He did not know it was the beginning of his end. He was falling, step by step, into a love I would weaponize against him, and when I was finished, when his heart beat only for me, I would shatter it with the same cruelty he once showed me. Only this time, he would never recover. He would crawl, beg, bleed for me. And then he would lose everything. The days after the wedding became a performance, and I played my role with flawless devotion. In public, I was the perfect wife, eyes glowing with admiration, voice soft and sweet whenever I spoke his name, hand lightly resting on his arm as though I belonged nowhere else. The world saw us as radiant newlyweds, a couple blessed by fate itself. But beneath the silks and the smiles, I was studying him, memorizing the cracks in his mask, the subtle tells he thought invisible. I knew when his gaze strayed too long at the door, when his smile grew strained as he made excuses to leave early, when his hand tightened around a wineglass just before he lied. In my first life, those cracks had shattered me. In this one, they were weapons I sharpened against him. I encouraged his affection, feeding his vanity until he began lingering longer at my side. I learned the words that softened his voice, the touches that made him pause, the laughter that made his eyes darken with want. Each reaction was a thread, and I wove them into a web strong enough to bind him. At night, when he thought I was asleep, I listened to his pacing, the way he muttered into his phone, the whispered name of the mistress who once ruined me. My stomach turned at the sound, but I did not falter. I would not confront him too soon. No, I would make him think I was his greatest treasure before I revealed that I knew every one of his sins. The true satisfaction would be watching his devotion crumble when he realized the woman he betrayed had been the one orchestrating his downfall all along. Yet even as I built my trap, I was not alone in the shadows. He found me again, the man who had promised his help. One evening, as I walked the lantern-lit gardens while my husband attended to business, I heard the crunch of footsteps behind me. I turned, and there he stood, his eyes darker than the night. "He's lying to you already," he said without preamble, his voice low, controlled. I followed him. He went to her. A sting of betrayal pricked my chest, but I forced myself to smile, to meet his gaze without wavering. "Good," I whispered. "Let him dig his grave deeper." His brow furrowed, his jaw tight. "You shouldn't be the one hurt again." I stepped closer, until the lantern light painted his sharp features in gold. "I won't be hurt," I told him, my voice trembling not with fear but with determination. "Not this time. He'll be the one begging." For a moment, his hand lifted as if to touch me, to brush the hair from my face, to claim a closeness he had never dared before. But he stopped himself, his fingers curling into a fist at his side. His restraint was both infuriating and intoxicating, a fire banked too long. "Then let me help you set the stage," he murmured. "If you want him to fall, I'll make sure there's no way out when the trap closes." My heart raced at his promise, my pulse thundering with the dangerous thrill of having him at my side. Together, we would dismantle the lies my husband built, strip away his charm until only desperation remained. And when my husband finally fell to his knees, begging for the love he had once squandered, I would remind him of every tear he caused me, every night I spent alone, every wound he carved into me. Only then would I crush him. Only then would I be free. And perhaps, though I dared not say it aloud, the fire that waited in the shadows beside me would finally consume me whole. By the 3rd month of our marriage, my husband had become unrecognizable even to himself. The man who once flaunted his mistress and humiliated me at every gathering now clung to me with restless hunger, his eyes following me across rooms, his voice softening when he spoke my name. I had crafted myself into the dream wife he never deserved, attentive, adoring, perfectly pliant on the surface, but beneath the silken smiles, I was coiling chains around his heart. Every time he cancelled a meeting to dine with me, every time he dismissed a servant just to whisper secrets into my ear, I tightened the hold. He thought he was choosing me, but really, I was scripting his every move. Still, it was not enough to have his heart. I needed proof of his corruption, his deceit, the rot that festered beneath the polished facade. And for that, I turned again to the man in the shadows, the one who was my true partner. He led me through ledgers late at night, his hand steady over mine as he pointed to falsified accounts, hidden transfers, names of allies bought with blood money. His voice was low, dangerous, yet filled with a rare tenderness when it came to me. "He trusts you blindly now," he said one night as our fingers brushed over incriminating documents. "When the time comes, you'll be able to strike without him suspecting a thing." I looked at him, the lamplight carving his features into something fierce and beautiful, and felt a pull in my chest that had nothing to do with vengeance. His eyes lingered on me too long, his breath too close, and for a heartbeat the air between us shifted from strategy to something far more dangerous. My lips parted, my body leaning toward his as though betraying me, but I forced myself back, swallowing the hunger that threatened to break free. There was no room for weakness now, not even the weakness of wanting him. The very next evening, my husband appeared at my side with a bouquet of roses, his expression uncharacteristically earnest. He had never once brought me flowers in my first life, and the sight of them in his hands was almost laughable. "You've changed me," he murmured, pressing the blooms into my arms. "I never realized how empty I was before you." I smiled sweetly, the perfect picture of a woman touched by her husband's devotion, and kissed his cheek softly. "Then don't ever let me go," I whispered, the irony twisting sharp inside me. He kissed me as though sealing a vow, and I let him, even as my mind spun with the knowledge of the mistress he had not truly abandoned, the hidden accounts he thought I would never uncover. He believed he was falling in love. In truth, he was falling into my trap. Each day he grew weaker, more dependent, more blind to the snares tightening around him. And when I finally dragged his sins into the light, when I exposed him before the world, he would not just lose his reputation or his wealth. He would lose the only thing he thought he finally had, me. And that loss would destroy him more completely than any blade could. My husband's obsession deepened until it dripped from every word, every touch, every look. He cancelled trips to stay by my side, ignored the very mistress he once flaunted so boldly, and grew restless if I left his sight too long. He believed himself in control, believed he was finally experiencing true love, but I knew better. I was feeding him morsels of affection like a starving hound, rewarding his loyalty with just enough warmth to keep him begging. Each kiss I gave him was deliberate, every caress calculated, every sigh rehearsed to bind him tighter. At the same time, I worked tirelessly with the man who was my true ally, the one who stood just beyond my husband's notice yet shaped our every move. We pored over letters in candlelight, exposed accounts hidden through webs of shell companies, traced the threads of his infidelity not only of the flesh but of business. Each discovery was another nail in his coffin. My ally's hands brushed mine more often now, his gaze lingering too long, his voice dropping when he spoke to me as though the walls themselves might betray us. He wanted more, I saw it, felt it, but he restrained himself, his respect a sharp contrast to my husband's greedy possession. And I was dangerously close to wanting more from him too. One night, after a charity gala where my husband played the doting spouse to perfection, I slipped away to the gardens, the roses heady in the night air. My ally was waiting, his arms crossed, his expression taut. "You're sinking too deep," he warned. "If he truly believes he loves you, his fall will be violent." I stepped closer, the moonlight painting silver in his hair, my heart beating too fast for the calm mask I wore. "That's the point," I whispered. "The deeper he falls, the harder he'll break." He searched my face, his hand lifting to hover at my cheek before dropping, his restraint a torment I hadn't asked for. "And what about you?" he murmured. "What will be left of you when you break him?" My throat tightened, but I forced a smile, my hand brushing his sleeve in fleeting comfort. "Don't worry about me. I've died once already. This time, I'll be the one who kills." His eyes burned with something unspoken, something I couldn't let myself reach for. Because at that very moment, my husband's voice echoed through the garden, calling my name with a hint of panic. He found us seconds later, his face lighting with relief before darkening with suspicion at the sight of me with another man. "What's this?" he demanded, his voice sharp. I laughed softly, stepping into his arms with ease, brushing my lips over his jaw before he could question further. "I needed air," I soothed, tilting my head with practiced devotion. "And he was kind enough to escort me." My husband relaxed under my touch, his jealousy melting into shame for having doubted me. He apologized, he kissed my hands, he begged my forgiveness for suspecting even a moment of disloyalty. I smiled sweetly, heart pounding with triumph. He was sinking deeper, blinded by the illusion I spun, while the man who truly saw me stood in silence, watching, waiting. The net was nearly closed. Soon, my husband would choke on the love he thought he owned, and when I exposed him before the world, the betrayal would crush him so completely he would wish he had never touched me at all. The trap tightened with every passing day. My husband's colleagues began to whisper about his distraction, about how the once sharp and calculating man seemed softer, less focused, his eyes forever trailing after his wife. He dismissed business meetings to dine with me, left urgent letters unanswered so he could walk with me through gardens, canceled travel arrangements just to stay near my side. The mistress he once flaunted was now hidden away, her rage simmering in the dark while he showered me with gifts and vows of devotion. I played the role flawlessly, my every sigh and smile crafted to ensnare him further, until he no longer knew where his own will ended and mine began. But I knew his nature hadn't truly changed. His heart might be tangled in mine, but his greed and arrogance were festering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. That was why I met with my true ally more often, our conspiracies drawn in hushed tones over stolen nights. We sifted through documents, uncovered falsified ledgers, proof of secret affairs both carnal and financial. With each piece of evidence we gathered, the weight of our connection deepened, the air between us thick with more than just strategy. One evening, as the rain lashed against the windows of the library, I found myself alone with him, the scent of ink and storm clinging to the air. His eyes locked on mine, fierce and unyielding, his hand brushing against mine as he pushed a damning letter toward me. "This will ruin him," he said, his voice low. "One move and his empire collapses." My heart pounded, not only at the triumph laid before me but at the nearness of him, the warmth of his fingers grazing mine, the raw honesty in his gaze. For a heartbeat, I forgot the plan, forgot the mask, forgot everything except the way his lips lingered near mine as though he was daring me to close the distance. But before either of us could move, the doors slammed open and my husband entered, his expression dark, his voice sharp with suspicion. "What are you doing here alone with my wife?" His eyes darted to the letter on the desk, and for one terrifying moment, I thought he would see the truth. But I moved quickly, slipping into his arms, laughing softly as though his jealousy was unfounded. "He was helping me choose a gift for you," I said smoothly, brushing my lips against his jaw to soften the fury in his eyes. My husband hesitated, his suspicion warring with the blind devotion I had cultivated, and finally he melted beneath my touch, kissing my hands and begging forgiveness for his doubts. He never noticed the flicker in my ally's eyes, the storm of desire and restraint that threatened to tear us both apart. As my husband pulled me close, whispering promises of eternity, I looked over his shoulder at the man who had become my truest weapon. His gaze burned into mine, and I knew he felt it too, the pull, the fire, the dangerous thread binding us together even as we plotted another man's destruction. My husband thought he was winning my heart, thought he was living a dream. But the truth was simple, he was already walking willingly into the grave I had dug, and when the time came, it would not be just his empire that fell. It would be him. Completely, irrevocably, destroyed by the love he thought was his salvation. The masquerade of love became his obsession, and I watched with quiet satisfaction as the man who once mocked me now unraveled beneath my every glance. He showered me with jewels, silks, and whispered declarations in the dead of night, confessions he never would have admitted in my first life. He was terrified of losing me, though he could not understand why, and it drove him to cling harder, to give me more. Each day, he dug his own grave deeper with gifts of loyalty I would later twist into chains. But love alone would not ruin him, it had to be truth, the kind of truth that tore reputations apart and left nothing standing. That was where my ally came in, steady and relentless in his hunt for evidence. Together we unearthed contracts forged under false names, secret accounts fattened with stolen funds, letters to women he had promised everything and abandoned without a thought. Each revelation was a dagger, and soon I would plunge them all into his heart. Yet the nights we spent piecing his sins together were becoming more dangerous than the work itself. The lines between strategy and temptation blurred until I could barely breathe when we were alone. One evening, when the moon was high and the estate slept, I found myself in the study with him, the fire crackling low, the air thick with unspoken words. He leaned closer than usual, his hand braced on the desk beside me, his eyes searching mine with a hunger he no longer tried to hide. "You're playing with fire," he said quietly, his voice rough. "Every time he touches you, I want to drag you away and remind you who you're really fighting for." My pulse stuttered, my resolve trembling under the weight of his words. His face was so close that I could feel the warmth of his breath, the faint graze of his lips against my cheek as though he was daring me to surrender. And for a moment, I nearly did. But the door creaked open then, and my husband's voice filled the room. He stood there, disheveled from drink, his eyes narrowing at the sight of us. Suspicion flared, sharp and ugly, but before it could bloom into fury, I slipped forward into his arms, pressing a kiss to his lips with practiced devotion. "You startled me," I laughed softly, leaning my head against his chest. "I was only waiting for you." He melted instantly, his suspicion dissolving into shame for doubting me. He kissed me as though to atone, murmuring apologies while my ally stood rigid in the shadows, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on mine with a storm of emotions we both pretended not to see. That night, as my husband clung to me in bed, whispering that he could not live without me, I stared into the darkness with a secret smile. He had no idea how right he was. He was addicted, desperate, drowning in the love I had crafted for him, blind to the trap snapping shut. Soon I would pull the world's gaze upon him, show everyone the monster hiding beneath the charming mask, and when his empire crumbled, when his mistress cursed his name, when his allies abandoned him, he would have only me left to hold on to. And that was when I would let him fall, shattering his heart into dust just as he had once shattered mine. The downfall began with whispers, the kind that slithered through noble halls and banquet tables until they grew into daggers of doubt. At first it was subtle, rumors of mismanaged funds, murmurs of unfaithfulness, sly comments about where his wealth truly came from. My husband laughed them off, basking in the comfort of my devotion, never once suspecting that I was the one feeding the flames. Every smile I gave him, every kiss I placed on his lips, every night I whispered love into his ear, it was all calculated to make him lean on me, to make him blind to the tightening noose. He came to me one evening, his hands trembling as he pressed them to my waist. "They're lying about me," he murmured, desperation bleeding through his perfect facade. "But you believe me, don't you? Tell me you believe me." I cupped his face, letting my eyes glisten with false tears, and whispered, "Of course I do. You're my world." He crushed his mouth to mine then, broken and desperate, and I let him, savoring the way his heart clung to the illusion I'd built. Meanwhile, in the shadows, my ally prepared the final strike. We gathered documents, testimonies, proof that could not be denied. I sat beside him in the candlelit study as he laid each piece before me, his hand brushing mine with every damning revelation. His gaze was fire when it met mine, his voice rough with a hunger he barely restrained. "When this is over," he said, his eyes burning into me, "he'll have nothing left, not his name, not his wealth, not even you." My heart pounded, my breath shallow, because in that moment I wanted nothing more than to close the space between us, to give in to the pull that had grown stronger with each secret we shared. But I forced myself to smile, to hide the ache in my chest, because the game was not yet finished. The final act arrived at a grand gala, where my husband sought to prove his power by flaunting me on his arm. He kissed my hand before the crowd, his voice booming with pride as he toasted to love, to loyalty, to the empire he had built. And then, as the music swelled and all eyes turned toward him, I gave the signal. One by one, allies stood and denounced him. Documents were revealed, contracts displayed, mistresses stepped forward with tearful confessions. The hall erupted into chaos, gasps and accusations colliding, and in the center of it all stood my husband, pale and trembling, his mask torn away. He turned to me then, eyes wide with horror, his voice breaking. You knew." I stepped forward, touching his cheek tenderly, letting the crowd see the perfect wife comforting her broken husband. And then I leaned close, my lips brushing his ear, my whisper a dagger meant only for him. I made you love me so you could finally understand what it feels like to lose everything. He collapsed, his empire burning around him, the world watching as the golden man turned to ash. And I stood tall, the husband who once ruined me now ruined by my hand, while in the corner of the hall, my true ally's eyes found mine, blazing with pride and hunger and the promise of something more once the dust settled. The days after the gala were chaos, a storm of scandal that consumed everything my husband had built. His allies abandoned him, merchants withdrew their support, mistresses clawed at his reputation with their confessions, and the name that once commanded respect was spat with disgust in every hall. He withdrew into himself, clinging to me as though I were the last pillar left standing, blind to the truth that I had been the one to orchestrate every fall. I played the role flawlessly to the end, holding his trembling hands, whispering love against his ear, promising that I would never leave him. Each word was a dagger, and each kiss was poison, and still he believed, his love for me so consuming that he never saw the betrayal until it was far too late. On the final night, when the world had turned its back and he sat slumped in his study, surrounded by the ashes of letters and the ruins of contracts, he looked at me with tears streaking his perfect face. "Why," he choked, his voice hoarse, broken. "I loved you. I gave you everything. Why would you do this to me?" I stepped closer, my crimson gown whispering against the floor, and cupped his face in my hands as though I adored him still. My lips brushed his ear as I whispered, "Because once, you did this to me. And I wanted you to feel what it meant to die while still breathing." His eyes widened, horror and realization colliding, and then he broke completely, his sobs shattering the silence. I left him there, ruined and hollow, the once untouchable man now nothing but a broken shell begging for the love he had scorned. Outside, the night air was cool, and waiting for me in the shadows was the man who had stood by me through it all. His eyes met mine, burning with something fierce, something real. He reached for me, his hand steady, his voice low but certain. "It's over. You've won." I let him pull me close, my heart finally softening in his arms, the weight of vengeance lifting to make room for something new, something dangerous and tender all at once. His lips found mine, a kiss that was not strategy, not manipulation, but truth. For the first time in 2 lives, I felt free, not as a wife discarded, not as a pawn destroyed, but as the woman who had risen from ruin, who had made her enemy fall in love only to break him, who had chosen her true partner with clear eyes and steady hands. Behind me, my husband's empire lay in ruins. Before me, a future burned bright with victory and passion. I had died once, but now I lived, crowned not by his name but by my own triumph, and in the arms of the man who had walked through fire with me, I finally claimed the life that was mine.